What is something that poor people do that rich people are oblivious to? Story 1. Wait for everything. Wait for the bus to arrive, BC, it's always late. Take longer to travel farther to the cheaper store. Wait at the laundromat for your clothes to finish. Not only that, but the frequency of these waits is also higher because you don't have a car or money to be able to buy things in bulk or transport large amounts of clothing. It is time-consuming AF. Story 2. The amount of time you'll take to decide which expensive thing to buy, because you only get one chance at this, and it'll only happen once in your life, most likely. The amount of shit you'll save, boxes, soap, bubble wrap, bags, freebie whatevers, just because it's easier to save it than buy it. You learn a lot about how to fix your own shit when you can't afford to pay someone to fix it for you. Story 3. Keep a running tally of everything in the cart, then add tax. Then get to the self-checkout and check through the most needed items first, checking the total to see if the $2 bag of carrots will be too much. Self-checkout because it's less embarrassing to put something back. And poor people have to good at math and adding percentages for tax. Story 4. Live with ed-up teeth because they have high copays and low annual maximums and can barely afford to even get cavities filled. Rich people get extremely competitive health, vision, and dental plans so they don't have to think twice. They need care? They get it. I have a rotten tooth that needs to be surgically extracted, need several root canals and crowns, need tons of cavity fillings, and have congenitally missing teeth. I can get the extraction, plus bone graft and implant, and handle one cavity before I hit my annual maximum. I floss and brush twice a day. I just have weak enamel and haven't been able to afford dental care in a while. And the missing teeth? Sorry. It's congenital/pre-existing, so they don't have to cover it. No, Karen, I'm not doing drugs. God, people lose interest in talking to me the instant they notice my teeth, especially hiring managers. I start to smile as the conversation gets good and suddenly the light just leaves their eyes. It's humiliating. Story 5. Ignoring random calls from numbers you don't recognize, knowing there's a high chance they are debt collectors. Googling these numbers, confirming them, then adding their whole range of numbers to your block list because you don't have any money to offer and aren't in the position to even loose $10 PW to pay them. Story 6. Being poor is insanely expensive. Car breaks down? You now have no way to get to work and can only afford the cheapest repair, which only patches the problem. Prepare to pay for tow service and impound fees. If you can't pay the compounding cost, you don't have a car anymore, but are responsible for all the fees associated with owning a car. Forget about having a job if you don't have a car. You can pay for an Uber Lyft while paying for your phone in a car that you can't use. Unless you live in a rural area, that rideshare doesn't make sense. Story 7. Being in constant fear that their children will be taken into care because there is not enough money for the basics, or just enough money, but one unexpected bill can be the end of it all. We had a scandal in the Netherlands where people were falsely accused of fraud. They had to pay back a lot of money at once. Some things mentioned by them. One parent often had to quit their job because they couldn't afford a babysitter. They only got a very minimal amount of their salary, as most of it went to this sudden debt. It led to more debts, as the money they had left was not enough to cover their monthly bills. Some suddenly couldn't afford their house anymore, lost their house, had to move to a small apartment. Relationships often don't last if all you do is argue about money. Some left their children alone at night to work an extra night shift. They didn't want to, but it's either that or no food, no bills paid, so no electricity, losing their home. People always said it was their own fault. It was not. Shame. If people know you struggle financially, you will be the first one to be accused of being a thief if something goes missing, even if there have been a lot of people with access to the missing item/money. Etc. Story 8. Make sure their phone is charged before they leave to go grocery shopping so that they can keep their calculator app open in the kid basket of the cart so they can add up everything they're buying. Where I grew up, sales tax was 5%, and this was factored into our budget. When we moved to a state with no sales tax, my dad was thrilled that we could get one or two small things extra because we didn't have to budget for tax. And then he realized we had to budget for bottle deposit. Story 9. Eat the same items for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That way, you can keep food expenses the same each week. It got to a point I did the same thing for gas money. Drive the same route to work and to other places so I'd know how much gas money I'd need for the week. Story 10. Not go on vacations. Having worked for a couple of very rich bosses over the years, they sure knew how to budget. They didn't get rich by spending crazy. They weren't oblivious to food costs, gas prices, etc. But more than once I had a boss act like they didn't realize most people can't just afford to go on vacations. Like, yeah, I know cruises are an amazing deal for you, but no, I can't chat about my favorite because I've never been. Story 11. Most people have heard of Greyhound buses, But in Raleigh, North Carolina, there's bus services that most people don't know about that run to New York and all the way to Mexico. Some people did learn about the Chinatown buses when one crashed going from Raleigh to New York around a decade ago. We have a big Mexican population with the farms in the eastern part of the state, so migrant farm laborers takes buses from Raleigh back down to Mexico after the harvest season. Story 12. This may be niche, but surveys. I'll do Google rewards to have a little credit in my app store, just in case I ever want an in-game purchase or an app that isn't free. Store survey that gives me credit or coupons? Absolutely. Nielsen survey with a $5 reward? Yes, please. My big one is sites where you do paid surveys. Every so often I'll get serious about doing a lot of them. So in an emergency, I always have $20 I can transfer to my PayPal or whatever. Story 13. Not being able to sleep because how hungry you are. Not having a social life because you never had money. Never having been out of the state you're from / never traveled. Calculating groceries before checkout. Being frugal, thrifty, and zero waste before it was trendy. I was always mortified as a kid someone I knew from school or the block would see me in the thrift store or flea market buying used clothes. Story 14. From a meta perspective, having a constant amount of stress and unspoken, sometimes unacknowledged worry and fear about everything because you can't afford one single thing to happen that adds to your expenses. Everything from an oil change, cold winter weather, an urgent care visit, broken window, call to the plumber. It isn't always acknowledged, but that constant worry is always lurking. Story 15. Man, I will never forget the moment going from part-timer working full-time hours to a salary position and almost overnight no longer calculating items in the cart before checkout. All those years of humility, we can do better as a society, but stay focused and on course. It will be worth it, and it doesn't have to be a marathon. Story 16. A few weeks ago, I went out with my BF friends group. They gagged wine, liqueurs, and expensive dishes. I tried to stay under 40. For the evening, had one dish and water. Then at the end, my BFS stinking rich friends announces that we should just split the bill equally. My BF had to fight for everyone to just pay their own stuff. They are nice, but have no clue what it feels like to struggle at the end of the month. I felt so poor, but I'm glad my BF was there for me. Otherwise, I would have paid over 90. Story 17. Going hungry because there was not enough food to last until payday. Taking empty bottles back for the deposit so you have gas money to get to work at your server job, hoping it is not a slow night, and you will make enough to have gas money to make it back home, which felt like moving up in the world because it was a rusty car, but it was a car and not walking. Later in life, after getting a degree, used my GI Bill from serving in the military, and doing better financially, I took a trip to Mexico. After visiting a poor fishing village with no running water or plumbing, I realized that I was never poor. Story 18. Worry about whether or not you can afford to go to the doctor. This has been a major stressor in my life. Gratefully, I made it to 65 and can have Medicare and afford a good supplement and the Medicare Part B premiums because I'm basically falling apart from lack of care prior to this. Story 19. Buy nearly everything used. Extra vigilance about turning lights off / heat down. Stress over grocery cart math. Drink a huge glass of water before eating in order to feel full. Money gets used immediately to stay alive, leaving nothing to invest or put away for retirement. Don't even look at the balance in the bank account because it will cause too much stress. I'm in a much better financial position now than when I was younger, but I still do many of these things. Story 20. Making a shopping list for everything you need right now, then setting that aside and making a second list, minus the things you can stand to do without, until you get paid again in 2 weeks. Letting things that you need, not just want, sit in your Amazon cart for months until you have enough money saved up to place the order. No vacations ever. If you don't work, you don't get paid. It's not about being fashionable. It's about keeping one's ass covered and warm for the lowest possible price. What it feels like to silently pray that your car starts every time you turn the key, and then never taking your foot off of the gas during the drive. Accepting that you're too poor to be prideful. If people openly ridicule you for your desperate choices, you know it was absolutely the best you could do with what you have, and there's no point crying in shame for wearing clothes with holes in them or buying generic bullshit food that you bring from home so that you don't go hungry day after week after month after year. Missing the academic train in your teens and spending the rest of your life working bullshit, low-paying jobs because you can't stop supporting your family long enough to obtain a degree or really even take a chance to change professions. If you're surviving, why would you sabotage that for a shaky chance at something that might not work out? Being forced to endure the aforementioned derision because your wealthy employers assume the help is only in that position because they're lazy, or story 21, there's a certain amount of stress in seeing your bank account dwindle. My wife and I remember it as college kids, when your account was below $400, or hell, $40. Brutal. We're fine now and every bill is on autopay. If both our jobs disappeared, we could sit around for 3 years doing nothing. Neither of us has to take jobs we don't want. We are extremely picky and selective. We interview our employers. You're at an immediate advantage when you're looking for new jobs, and you know you're the big dick in the room, and they'd be very fortunate to land you. So you land more jobs because your attitude isn't, I'll starve if I don't land this job. My wife is a psychologist with part-time hours because she likes to be with the kids. That's a luxury many don't have. We both work from home. Another luxury. There's a remarkable freedom in that flexibility. Very poor people enjoy none of that. How expensive it is to be poor. You can't afford to get your car inspected, you get a ticket, you overdraft your account by 5.00 comma, and they charge you 36.00. You get a utility shut off, you have to pay extra to have it put back on. You pay more for car insurance because of bad credit, because you're too broke to pay bills on time. I could go on and on. Story 22. Keep the package and receipt for 90 days for everything you buy in case you need to return it for money. When my oldest moved out, he had a ton of empty boxes. I asked him why he had kept them, and he said because I always had. It broke my heart to tell him why we did it. He never realized how bad off we'd been when he was younger. Story 23. It came out poor. But we save hot sauce packs from Taco Bell and Taco Time. They each get their own container. We always get more than we need, but sometimes they totally forget, so we have backups. Also soy sauce. We never use it on our Chinese food and we get tons, but we use it with other stuff. I cut the packets and funnel them into the bottle. You'd be surprised how much those packets can hold. Yeah, and any fast food napkins end up in the glove box. We call them car napkins, LOL. Story 24. Having Hare Krishna dinners. When my kids were young, we always had chickpeas, lentils, rice, and spices. We called them Hare Krishna dinners. My kids still call them that. When they make food from the limited stuff they have in cupboards, I still make them even though we no longer is short on cash. Also only buying reduced price groceries. Story 25. Transfer money from savings into checking every month because the checking account has no fee if there's either a direct deposit of the paycheck or a $25 transfer to the savings account every month. But there's not enough income to have $25 to save every month. So I would just do a shell game where the bank saves the same $25 every month. Story 26. Overpay for everything. Anytime you see someone going to the dollar store or putting gas in their car somewhere other than Costco or cashing a check in person, they are getting effed. Also driving on shitty tires. Also worry. I don't think rich people understand how exhausting it is to live month to month, much less week to week or day to day. Hustling just to have a break-even day, hoping nothing goes sideways or some unforeseen expense derails everything. A parking ticket or losing a Metro card or a kid in the ER can ruin your life. Story 27. Elite folks have the missed classic American neighborhood upbringing, and they hate it. When they are born, they are given to a nanny and wet nurse, bottle nurse these days, then a nanny and tutor, then see their parents as convenient, dressed, expected to behave formally. Then they are put elite academy, preschool, and lessons. At 6, 7, they are usually sent to a prestigious boarding school, like the one Seattle all the internet giants attended, and any number of elite private residential schools around the world. They come home for holidays sometimes and trotted are for special events. If they misbehave and not conform, they are swept under the rug, hidden or institutionalized, then sent to a hand-picked legacy college and the way paved to success and privilege by money. All the time, their caregivers are paid servants. All love is transactional. Love is purchased. Relationships are a commodity in exchange of quid quo pro, providence for performance. Our rich leaders speak of traditional family or nuclear family as if they know it, but they know it as something they've seen on TV or films. It's a political trope, not something they value, because all the basics in their life are covered, even sex. In fact, they've elevated the basics to refined excess will forever separate them from experiencing a non-transactional relationship. And it infuriates them. The poor and creative, the voices of creativity and the diversity of human experience draw attention they've missed out on love, but also missed learning how to live and love life without monetizing every aspect. Knives Out is a great study on this, but the Kennedy family stories are the most real example of the true elite, generationally wealthy and cruel family. Story 28. Being resourceful. There are a million things around you that you can use for something instead of buying a new gadget or tool. No hammer? Use a piece of wood. Need to lift, move something heavy? Grab your friends. Need a pillow, bundled sweatshirt, a towel, a backpack. They don't ever have to worry about something not being available or done for them, so they lose the sense of creativity, making things work with what you have. Perfect example. The specific entity that I work for deals with road maintenance and winter weather. Had a complaint come in that one of our contractors accidentally dropped a bunch of rock salt in front of their house on the road in a very wealthy area and didn't clean it up. Wanted to call and make a report that if their grass dies in the spring, that we will be responsible. Little do they know we have several feet of right-of-way off of the roadway, so technically a small part of her lawn is in our right-of-way. I mean, how detached from reality can you be that that's your biggest worry all day long? Anyways, I thought to myself, what would I do? I would grab a bucket and a shovel, and now I have a ton of free rock salt to last me the winter. It's stuff like that that these people lose. If they were dropped in the woods, they'd be dead in a day. Story 29. Coworker about the possibility of a gov shutdown last week. We're federal workers. She's a couple pay grades above me. Cheerfully says this when some of us are discussing the stress of paying bills during a shutdown. Well, it shouldn't be bad. Just use your savings. She has a spouse who owns his own business, and she just bought a brand new car like 2 weeks before this. Like, girl, not everyone has huge savings or two-income households, or savings at all. Story 30. Doing the math to figure out if a raise or promotion will make you more poor. Like, will this $2,000 a year raise kick me off my subsidized insurance or other programs to where that $2,000 will just go to increases in insurance premiums for the shittiest employer healthcare package? On top of that, it will increase my deductibles and copays and make my medications more expensive. On top of that, make any doctor's visits outside of my annual physical cost so much that I can no longer go. So a $2,000 raise actually turns into a $3,000 loss. Story 31, run out of money. When we talk about our budget, we have an actual hard limit, and we don't always have savings to draw from. It's not just about whether we can justify a purchase, how important it is to us, or whether it will save us money in the long run. None of that matters if we don't have the money for it up front. Story 32, overdrawing my checking account for medication, or even better, going without medication. I lost everything during COVID while PPP money went to executives and my stimulus checks went directly to my landlord. I literally may never financially recover. I'm in my mid-30s and I've had to liquidate all my savings and retirement just to afford necessities since then. I've been applying to jobs for 4 years and cannot find anything that doesn't qualify me for food stamps. Story 33. I am 98% certain rich folk don't know what it takes to truly raise a child, and therefore they don't get that unconditional love between parent and child. They aren't in the trenches at 3 a.m. changing a screaming baby's diaper or trying to soothe them as they are teething, trying to keep it down so their poor wife on the other side of the paper-thin wall can get some much-needed rest after working all day and coming home to take care of the baby. All the strife, all the stress. They don't earn any of the smiles, coos, and giggles they get. They're off poisoning a rainforest to make more plastic crap for us to buy. Story 34. I very rarely pay for my own coffee. Off-work ATM, but when I wasn't, I would basically only drink it at work because they paid for it. And you just know I was refilling it covertly before it was too close to the end of the day to be obvious I was taking one for the road. Doesn't apply so much in cities, I'm sure, but a semi-common thing among lower-income people around here is to buy rejected produce and freeze it long-term/divide it among relatives. It's usually just superficial damage from an especially hot growing season or something like that. Just a couple years ago, I got 40 pounds of rejected peppers for $20 Canadian and had my brother storing it for me because I didn't have my own chest freezer yet. Story 35. My aunt took me, my mom, and sister out shopping for Christmas. She was so happy, but I don't think she understood how nervous we were. She basically said, get every single thing we need. We love them so much. It's just hard explaining that going from almost starving to being able to get anything we need made our minds go blank, while also feeling overwhelmed at the same time. At the end, we got what we needed, and I'm very thankful. Story 36. Not celebrating holidays because receiving a bunch of shit feels scummy when you can't return the favor or pay it forward. Working on the holidays, not having vacations, shoplifting, stealing toilet paper from work, taking free food instead of using employee discount. Learn to navigate around cops. Manage your luck. Can't do fun, adventurous things because if you get injured, you miss work and have medical bills. Learn to live with tooth pain until you need an emergency extraction. Live with your parents because you can't afford to rent even a shitty apartment. Pay credit card debt off with another credit card. Let credit card debt go to collections. Ignore collection offers and let it go to the IRS as income so you can set up a payment plan. What is credit per S? Ruin their lives with one bad decision or unfortunate event. Note gas prices and fill up the tank only when the price is low. IDK. I feel like I could go all in night long ranting about affluenza. Story 37. How living in poorer areas crams people together. Smaller yards, more people in each house, and the lack of space creates risks. Your neighbor has an issue with drugs, alcohol, mental health. We all know it and see it and live in fear of it. Lots of people in your household working and going to different schools, along with crowding, more illnesses for everyone. Not enough cupboard, fridge, freezer space due to small houses and overcrowding. More expensive groceries because you can't store food. Story 38. Do everything ourselves. Rich people don't have the same 24-hour day as we do. They have personal assistants, chefs, babysitters, tutors, etc. We maybe have a daycare that we pay through the nose, and we have to do everything else ourselves. Cook, clean, do laundry, go grocery shopping. Story 39. Have a far higher cost of living. The fewer resources you have, the more it takes to wake up tomorrow. The local hospital kicks unhoused people out of the warming stations an hour before the Catholic Church opens its doors to worshipers. There's nowhere to go that doesn't involve spending money. Rich people, A, have more options of places to stay where you don't get booted before dawn, B, get a longer grace period before they get spoken to, and C, are much more likely to be treated as welcomed guests. Rich people conflate cost of lifestyle with cost of living. I have a Netflix subscription. That's lifestyle. The medical supplies I get online, that's survival, so part of my cost of living. But also it's much easier for me to manage routine to me medical issues at home because I can have a $16.75 part waiting to replace the thing that foreseeably breaks sometime. If I had less money, addressing that issue would mean an ED visit if I can go to the hospital in the wealthier part of town. If I call an ambulance, I go to the local hospital, which admits you to the floor, FPR this stuff. Being poor is so expensive that if rich people knew, some of them would live unhoused just to show everybody that they can afford it. Story 40. Have a far higher cost of living. The fewer resources you have, the more it takes to wake up tomorrow. The local hospital kicks unhoused people out of the warming stations an hour before the Catholic Church opens its doors to worshipers. There's nowhere to go that doesn't involve spending money. Rich people, A, have more options of places to stay where you don't get booted before dawn, B, get a longer grace period before they get spoken to, and C, are much more likely to be treated as welcomed guests. Rich people conflate cost of lifestyle with cost of living. I have a Netflix subscription. That's lifestyle. The medical supplies I get online, that's survival, so part of my cost of living, but also it's much easier for me to manage routine to me medical issues at home because I can have a $16.75 part waiting to replace the thing that foreseeably breaks sometime. If I had less money, addressing that issue would mean an ED visit if I can go to the hospital in the wealthier part of town. If I call an ambulance, I go to the local hospital, which admits you to the floor, FPR this stuff. Being poor is so expensive that if rich people knew, some of them would live unhoused just to show everybody that they can afford it. Story 41. Fixing/repairing/maintaining things. I had a rich friend for a while when I was a teen, and we would ride bikes and mess around like any country kids would do. But one day he came over and I was repacking the crank bearings on my bike, and he was actually really confused why I was not just buying a new bike. I told him it was just some maintenance to keep it working. He really could not understand why anyone would do that. We're not friends anymore, but he is still like that at nearly 40 years old. He never gained any appreciation for anything in life because nothing was ever an issue, and nothing was ever at risk of being lost to him through inaction. Story 42. Having shitty credit, so loans are more expensive if you can get one at all. Paying more for various things month to month like phone plans, instead of having a cheaper contract because of the shitty credit. Taking $20 out of an ATM 5 times costs more in charges than taking out $100 at once. Living in that sweet spot where you bring in a smidge more money than the maximum to receive heat assistance, EBT, etc. Getting a meal from the Methodists on Tuesdays, the Episcopalians on Wednesdays, and the Baptists on Thursdays. Balking at the prices at Goodwill, the Salvation Army, and Savers. Throwing most of your income at rent, which does not build credit. Free lunches and not being able to pay for field trips for the kiddos. Having car repair bills that your budget for months, if you can afford to pay them at all, because you can only afford shitty cars. Story 43. Buying your clothes at thrift stores. I bought so much stuff at thrift stores or cheaply online. Jackets, coats, shirts, shorts, jeans, trousers, bags, suits. The only article of clothing I can think of that I bought brand new with my own money in the last 4 years was a new overcoat. $400 cashmere wool blend. It's like wearing a cloud. It's so soft and fluffy. The $400 made me cry, but I wanted a really good overcoat, and this one had all the features and color I wanted. And then I didn't wear it for 2 years, because COVID lockdown meant I never went outside long enough to need it. So I didn't start wearing it properly until the end of 3 years. Story 44. Budget priorities. Long time ago, I ended up in a very bad financial situation, basically hit rock bottom. After I clawed my way out, I learned to budget like Scrooge. Food comes first on the list of priorities, then rent, then utilities, then transport cost, to from work, then things like data plans, etc. I would do whatever it took to keep my budget as low as possible, because I learned the hard way what real fear is like when you're down to the last $5 and have no idea where your next meal is coming from after that is gone. Story 45. I just want to say poor people seem to be more considerate of others and probably time things a lot better too. I had a rich friend growing up and he and his parents were often really inconsiderate. Like one time I was visiting my friend at his house, and while I was there, his parents made him go to someone's birthday party. So I was just there at his house waiting for like an hour or so for him to come back. The point of me visiting was so I could play with him. So while he was gone, I had basically nothing to do. Talk about awkward. They did other weird, inconsiderate things like that too. It's like WTF, you guys. You have a guest over, and you just make your kid go to a party and leave the guest at home with nothing to do. Story 46. I'm surprised I haven't seen this yet. But go a long time with broken appliances because you don't have money to fix them. Go to the laundromat. Take cold showers because you ran out of hot water. Also, go to the library to print because you either don't have a printer or the printer at home is broken. See above. These are just off the top of my head from growing up without much money. Story 47. This has probably already been said. Paying over and over for the smaller packaged item, even though over the long term it's more expensive because you literally don't ever have enough to buy the one in bulk. Also buying cheaper items like clothes, only to have to buy them again 6 months later because the cheap material has already fallen apart. Story 48. Why don't you just move? For people who haven't experienced real poverty, they don't realize that you are literally stuck. Can't afford to take a day off to go to that job interview out of city/state/province? Stuck. Can't afford the trip to said opportunity? Stuck. Can't afford to move? Stuck. The list goes on. The list goes. Sometimes people fall into poverty and can't get out. Not because they don't have the will to, it's because they don't have the means to. Story 49. Sometimes you buy one extra need a week, like this week butter is on sale, so maybe you buy 2 of those and skip something else less necessary. Then the week after that, cereal is on sale, so you buy 4 boxes and skip another thing. I did this to build a pantry. Shopping. Buy all the sales. Literally, you only eat from the sale items. You realize coupons don't do all that much because most of them are for name brand products, but if you can take a sale item and combine it with a coupon and it's cheaper than store brand, it's like a mini win. We also had to keep the thermostat low, like a cold 60, 62. Now we're at the point we treat ourselves to 65 from 10 p.m. and it's about 62, 63 during the day. Story 50. That our lifestyle isn't the same as them. Growing up, I had a classmate who was really rich and she could afford literally everything, which for me was really tough. As she was my friend, she expected me to give her expensive presents, invite her to exclusive parties, and all which for me is like a dream. I won't misuse money like this, but she just couldn't understand. And some people I have encountered don't understand the concept of giving charity. Story 51. Being poor means not having to worry about protecting your wealth, how to secure your valuable jewelry, what alarm systems to use, how to invest your assets, how to manage your rental properties, how to insure yourself against liability, how to hire the right staff, etc. This can be almost a full-time job for wealthy people. Poor people get a paycheck and spend it on the bills. Maybe there will be a few bucks left over for a frosty beverage down at the local watering hole. That is it. Back to work to earn the next paycheck. Story 52. Having no doctor, no car, no traveling vacation, barely 10K saved in debt, constantly on a budget, fixing everything on our own, having no time to relax, having to freeze in your house. BC, you can't leave the heat on too long, high, only seeing fam on holidays, going to diff stores. BC, one sells it for cheaper. Living in a bad area, skipping meals, BC, you can't afford it. Story 53. Pay extra money every month buying prepaid debit cards to pay your bills because you can't get a bank account. Had I not worked at a large grocery store that served 2 different sides of town in my late teens, I'd never have known that was a thing. Also, what was said above, the waiting. Also having to spend more money over time on cheap products that don't last because you can't afford the nice products that will. Story 54. Meal planning around what's on sale in the flyers. Rummaging around day-old bakery racks and imperfect produce. Always knowing how many points you have on what loyalty card so that you can get $10 off occasionally. Telling your husband he can't have a second helping of meat at dinner because that's for tomorrow's lunch. I fantasize about being able to just go into a grocery store and just buy anything I want without looking at the price. Story 55. I file taxes each year but haven't earned enough to owe any income tax for the past 5 years. I don't know many wealthy folks with that situation. My well-off friends, yes, I have them, don't do the side hustling I do, nor do they barter or trade for services. They don't need to. They can just write checks or pay cash. I trade chores a lot. Neighbor mows my lawn and I take care of his dog when he travels. I drive my friend's wife, her car, to her many out-of-town medical appointments, cancer, and friend does the oil changes for my 25-year-old vehicle and does minor repairs. I house sit for families, and they pay me with local gift cards or groceries. I provide them a list to choose from. When I shop for perishable groceries, I share half with my widow lady neighbor down the street. We both get fresh fruit or produce, and we are able to use the smaller amount before it has time to spoil. She shares herbs/tomatoes/squash/onions/cukes from her garden with me. My church friend gets food bank delivery, but cannot eat the included rice/beans/pasta/sweets because of her diabetes, so she gifts those to me for my pantry. I do her vacuuming and drive her to appointments when asked. Yes, I can check on your cat every day when you are away for a week. That's $20 a day and maybe bring me back some good quality coffee or something fancy from Trader Joe's, etc. Also, not everything is a barter or a transaction. You need a sober driver to pick you up and drive you home safely. No problem, you don't owe me anything. Yes, I can follow you to the mechanic to drop off your car for service. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm old enough and disabled enough that no one will hire me for a regular part-time job. I'm not old enough or disabled enough to apply for Social Security or disability assistance. Takes commitment, planning, and communication to make this work, but it can be done in some situations. Story 56. There have been times I've had to make one bowl of ramen last for 2 days because I couldn't afford food. It still happens from time to time. I live in a rural, dirt-poor area that doesn't have the resources for any community aid or outreach, or even public transportation. Being poor is a trap, trying to dig out of a hole that keeps caving in. I work 2 jobs and make too much for assistance, but just enough to pay rent and bills. Ramen, hot dogs, and bologna sandwiches are sometimes most of my diet. Rich people know absolutely nothing about food insecurity. Story 57. Even the homeless get cell phones. This is actually something I've witnessed even in middle class, whatever that looks like nowadays. People saying someone can't be that poor or homeless if they have access to a cell phone. I've experienced it myself, actually. The old, you can't be struggling that bad if you're online. There are programs that give cell phones or internet access to the poor and homeless. It doesn't make someone any less poor for having a phone. It's not the 1960s where, if you're extremely low income, you're a classic hobo with a tin can. Also basic things like not being able to drive 20 miles at the drop of a hat, not being able to fly places or make long drives, watching gas, not being able to afford new clothes anytime needed, etc. Story 58. I immigrated to a country with socialized medicine. People thought I was nuts when within the first month I had made 4 different appointments. Dermatologist to finally get my searing red hand the cream it needs. I had accepted being a lizard. Gyno makes sure we're all good down there. Family doc, which then referred me to a pediatrist to finally do something about my plantar's wart beside duct taping my foot every day. I was so appreciative of being able to live like a healthy human. People take that for granted. Teeth aren't covered, though. Gotta save for that one. Story 59. One thing that poor people often do, which rich people may be oblivious to, is constantly having to make trade-offs in their day-to-day decisions. For example, poor people may need to prioritize spending on basic necessities like rent, food, and utilities, often at the expense of other things such as healthcare, education, or even self-care. They may also face barriers to accessing resources or opportunities that could improve their situation, such as limited transportation options, fewer networking opportunities, or difficulty saving for future goals. On the other hand, wealthy individuals typically have the financial flexibility to make decisions without worrying as much about immediate financial consequences and may not realize how much time, effort, and stress is involved in managing a tight budget. This can create a divide in understanding the daily struggles and strategies that come with living in financial insecurity. Story 60. ITT. No one who's rich. 8 out of every 10 millionaires in the U.S. are self-made first-generation wealth. Typically, wealth only lasts 3 generations. Most millionaires in the U.S. come from low income or poverty, build wealth through work and sacrifice, pass it down to their children who saw their parents' work ethic and reap the rewards, and then pass it to their children who have no example of what work and sacrifice are, and it's squandered. The fourth generation is left where the first started. Story 61. That I don't spend enough money going to the movies that not doing so would offset the cost of having children. Shit, I spend tons on hobbies and that's still not enough for raising children. Turns out children needs more than $20 a month, a high-end video card, a Steam sale, and an old monitor to live and go to college. Also, scratch that 20 per month. I haven't been to the movies in years. Story 62. Expect specific payoff for an investment. Can't go to multiple events to network for a job. Need to spend X amount and get at least a couple of leads with that. Can't float around building connections and so on. People who don't live like that find that pushiness offensive, especially in the job market. Like, dude, not everyone can chat up for months to find an opening. Story 63. I'm not even poor, and I've done most of the things in these comments. That says something about the American economy, I guess. There have been years where we lived below the poverty line, but most of the last 15 years, we've been above it. Even so, avoiding the doctor because we can't afford it, putting groceries back because there's not enough in the account, deciding which bills to not pay this month so we can stay in our home and not go hungry, etc., are all familiar. The thing about all the waiting, so painfully true. Waiting for the bus, waiting for the circuitous bus route and all the stops along the way, waiting for the clothes at the laundromat. So much of my adult life has been spent waiting. Story 64. Not go on trips. For example, I've told people, I've never been to Europe or Japan, or insert any cool, beautiful country or place worth visiting. And they're like, oh, you really should go. Yeah, let me just take all the vacation time I need, miss work, spend my entire life savings to take one trip to come home to a ridiculous amount of credit card debt I won't ever be able to pay off. Story 65. I notice rich people have an entitlement that some, not necessarily poor people, but middle class don't have. So the middle class care about saving the environment and not wasting. I have money, but I feel guilt about food waste or any sort of waste. I'm the type who would try to bring excess food to the beggars, even if it's very inconvenient. The rich never think of these things. They'll spend hundreds of thousands or millions and not feel guilt about the excess. I tend to get lots of gifts on B-days. Sometimes I have more than a dozen cakes from different people among other gifts. So I try to give them away instead of throwing them out. If I get things I won't use, I'll give them away. For me, it isn't about the money, it's about that people can benefit. One time we traveled. I bought water bottles to refill just to save the environment. Then I realized many people don't care. And I've since just learned to buy bottled water. Story 66. Growing up, my dad always took me to work with him. One job at the Walmart where I'd mostly sit at the McDonald's until his shift was done. His second job as a janitor, I'd go with him and help clean soon as I could walk. Oh, and we lived next to a trap house growing up for some years. We had the means to at least take in the poor little girl that lived there. Bathe her, feed her, treat her as our own. But we'd all share what little we had if it meant not seeing her dirty and starved in a house with no front door or electricity surrounded by drugs. Typically, when I tell anybody who grew up with a decent amount of money, they find these things a little crazy. LOL. Story 67. Deciding to go sightsee in another neighborhood in the same city and calculating if I had time to get to the neighborhood, walk around and get back home by transit in 90 minutes. The time a bus pass is valid because I didn't have enough money for return fare. Scrounging every pocket, cabinet, and couch cushions to find enough change to treat myself to a cup of coffee in a coffee shop. Story 68. Saving money. Bragging to their friends about how much money they were able to save versus rich. Brag about how much they spent. Binge. Eating from food insecurity. If your kitchen is usually empty and you suddenly get a surplus of food, you will binge eat it all in one sitting. But people who always have a surplus of food don't stuff their faces every time they get the chance because they know the food will always be there. Better hurry and eat it before it goes away, right? Impulse spending. Just like with the eating. Whenever they get a tiny surplus of money, they'll go spend it on tattoos or drugs just to feel a bit of happiness, even if I screws them over later. Pretend for a day that you're doing well, right? Story 69. Ignoring interests and hobbies because of the cost. Rich people don't really have to consider if they finically pursue their hobby, unless I guess it's horses or a yacht. Instead, if they want to. This is small, but I remember trying to come across as a tomboy as kid during a specific week of school because it was Princess Week, and we couldn't afford a princess dress. I did love fairy tales and dresses, but pretended I wasn't interested in being a part of the week because it wasn't my thing. Story 70. How to do quick repairs to things right down to the level of socks. How to shop for a diet that covers most nutritional goals using the best value for money ingredients, and how long you can do without some of them. Why you turn the discount of the day into something that looks like a fancy meal, and eating it anyway, even if you don't like it. Looking at something you want, dreaming for a moment you have it, then walking on without it. Just how much overbalanced bank fees hurt. Why you might sell something with massive sentimental value to you that you didn't want to lose.